So I just had an experience, y'all, where I just watched this man literally almost get hit by three different cars crossing the street. Now, before he crossed the street, I could tell that either he just didn't like to follow the rules of the road or he didn't properly know how to cross the street. And so before he crossed the street, I asked him, I said, "Hey, do you know how to cross the street?" And he shook his head and said, "Yeah." And then he proceeds to cross the street and almost get himself killed. Right? It was three different cars almost hit him on the way across because he wasn't crossing properly. And so after we made it across the street, I see him at the store and I'm like, "Hey," I said, "you obviously don't know how to properly cross the street." And he said, "Well, I didn't know that there was a proper way to cross the street." And this man, and a full adult, okay, seriously told me that he didn't know that there was a proper way to cross the street. And I explained to him how to properly cross the street. But this is a prime example right here, y'all, of why it's so important for us to communicate. This is why it's so important for us to not assume, that a person automatically knows something. His mom or his dad, you know what I'm saying, probably just assumed he knew how to cross the street. This man literally told me he thought the proper way to cross the street was to just not get hit. He said he thought the proper way to cross the street was to simply not get hit. So if this is an adult, an older being who is making these type of assumptions and having these types of thoughts, what do we think our children are thinking? What type of thoughts do we believe our children are creating when we're leaving the gap of a lack of communication with our children? Because we're assuming that our children know certain things when they don't. We're assuming that common sense is common, but common sense ain't so common and never has been. Every city, every state, every country or whatever, a common sense differs. So from one family to another, one gender to another, one race to another, the common sense is going to differ. So it's like, imagine what these children are out here thinking when we're not properly communicating to them. Imagine what our spouses may be thinking when we're not properly communicating to them. Imagine what we are leaving to fill the gap of a lack of communication, a lack of understanding. When we're making the assumption that somebody automatically knows something because they're 10 or because they're 15 or because they're an adult or because they're a certain gender or because they're a certain race, how many times are we going to continue to lose at this assumption game before we realize that we must communicate? This man, I just watched him almost lose his life because he didn't know how to properly cross the street. He didn't know that there was a proper way to cross the street. And when I explained it to him, he said, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. I never thought about it that way." He said, "I just learned something new today." How? Listen, that's an adult man, y'all. That's a whole man out here. Imagine kids. Imagine children that we're leaving this big old gap to be filled for them. Y'all, we got to start communicating better. A simple communication can take us a long way, but we got to use our communication skills. We got to use them or lose them. And a lot of us ain't been using them, so we've been losing them. Right? But I love y'all. That's the message. Be safe out here, y'all. Let us collectively commit to not making assumptions, right? Assuming that certain things are a certain way just because it's our common sense or it's our belief or it's what we thought. I just watched this man almost lose his life 3 different times. 3 different times. That's the message, y'all. Peace and love, my beauties.